Welcome to Inspiring Women in Audit, the only podcast celebrating the achievements and journeys of women in the internal audit industry. In each episode, we spotlight the extraordinary stories, insights, and expertise of these dynamic professionals. Our aim is to amplify their voices, inspiring a new generation of women auditors to share their knowledge, experiences, and unique perspectives. Remember to check our show notes for links to our social media channels and to subscribe to the Inspiring Women in Audit newsletter. This podcast is brought to you by I4 Global Results Limited, the audit communication experts, dedicated to transforming your audit reporting and your audit results through communication, optimization, and collaboration. Now, let's dive into this episode of Inspiring Women in Audit.
Welcome, everyone, to the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast. We're dedicated to empowering and uplifting women within the internal audit industry. By amplifying their voices, we aim to encourage women in the audit profession to share their knowledge, experiences, and unique perspectives. I'm your host, Tracy Marquardt. And I'm excited today to have Richa Shrivastava with me. Richa is the head of internal audit at NAB India Global Innovation Center at the time of recording, which is the National Australia Bank. And she leads the audit function there and has a strong focus on integrating technology and data-driven insights into the audit process. She has over 25 years of experience and brings a global perspective to audit and risk management. Richa is a chartered accountant, a certified financial risk manager, and holds a sustainability and climate risk certification. Beyond audit, she's deeply passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. She actively mentors professionals, supports women in leadership initiatives, and serves as the chapter director for South India at GARP, the Global Association for Risk Professionals, helping to empower the next generation of risk and audit professionals, which is what we need. I know today's conversation is going to be full of insight and inspiration. Thank you for joining me, Richa, and welcome to the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. In whichever form I could be of any help to the profession, I really look forward to the opportunities. In my career over 2.5 decades, I thoroughly enjoyed, while during the course of the career, I did learn quite a bit. I did enjoy my profession and try to give it back to the society and to the profession in whichever way I can. So, looking forward to our conversation and pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. And I'm wondering, because you do have such an expansive career, 25 years approximately, I always ask my guests, was there a defining moment when you knew internal audit was the right path for you?
Well, yes, definitely. I would say there was indeed quite a few defining moments. But if I give it a thought, then an early engagement in my career where my team and we uncovered some inaccuracies, some inefficiencies in one of the client engagement that did have a significant impact on the organization, both financially and operationally. It was a plant audit in a cement company, and the impacts were huge. At that point in time, there was a sense of accomplishment and realization that our work is making some tangible, positive effect to the organization. That gave me a lot of kick. And from then on, one finding led to another, one organization led to another. And then the journey continued. I started enjoying it during the course of my stint as the internal auditor, and it would be an understatement to say that as internal auditors, the privilege of interacting with the audit committees and boards early on in the career, it was definitely a very exciting opportunity to any young auditor. That also was one of the important driving factors in me continuing or picking this up as a profession.
I think that's great. I mean, number one, audit is about, I think, change, right? Audit is perfectly positioned, I think, to facilitate positive change in an organization. Interesting that you had exposure to the board and, higher levels within the organizations early in your career, because I don't think I did. And I'm wondering if that might have made a difference as a young auditor.
Indeed. Yes. Yes, it did, Tracy. So I was a part of a consulting organization, Big Four, as they call it popularly. And by virtue of being in Big Four, you at any given point in time are handling multiple clients. There are few clients where the book size may not be that high, but you still get an exposure early on. So, as a young auditor, it was quite exciting and exhilarating, I would say. I used to prepare quite a bit for those board meetings and audit committees. For those 10-15 minutes of presentation, that used to give so much of excitement presenting to the audit committees and to the boards and learning from their experiences. Even a small remark from them would make so much of a difference that the next time you are going to present to another client, you would ensure to take care of that one feedback. And that's how you graduate yourself as an auditor in your career.
So let me turn to risk and risk management. You've highlighted risk identification, monitoring, and mitigation as key topics that you're passionate about. I'm wondering if you can share your perspective on how these can increase the quality of audit results. That would be the first question. And the second question would be, how does that raise the perception of an internal audit team in the eyes of the business?
Wow, that's a great question and very close to my heart. I would pick up the first one first. Risk identification, monitoring, and mitigation. That cycle as a whole, I would say, is very fundamental to any internal audit assignment or any internal audit activity. Now, it does help me or any auditor in so many ways, but the way I look at it is first of all, if we have done risk identification, monitoring, and mitigation appropriately, this cycle does help us in many ways. First of all, enhanced focus on the key areas. Which are the areas that would require immediate attention? So you can pick up those areas on the basis of your risk assessment. Then there is a proactive issue resolution. Once you have identified a risk, then you can proactively work towards the mitigation of that risk with the corresponding department. It does help you in increasing the, what do you say, reliability of the financial reporting because most often than not, each and every risk would have a financial impact. And once you assess it, you monitor it over a period of time, and then you try and give recommendations to mitigate it, it increases the reliability of the financial reporting aspects also for the organization. Most importantly, audit in every organization is a cost center, Tracy. And because of that, there is always a limitation on the resources that you have. So, doing that risk mitigation and risk monitoring would help you use the audit resources efficiently in the high risk areas so that you can plan which are the areas from the organization strategic objective standpoint that needs immediate attention. And bottom line, it does help in continuous improvement. So, yes, this entire cycle, as I said, risk identification, monitoring, and mitigation is paramount in terms of handling the overall organization effectiveness from the internal audit standpoint. Does that answer your question?
It does. It makes me think of another question, if I can ask you before we get to my part two. Um, how closely do you think audit should work with risk management? Because typically they're two separate departments, right? So some say they should be aligned. In some organizations, the culture is not, it's not possible to align it fully. So what are your thoughts on that?
Quite a difficult question, I would say. And it does depend on the culture of the organization, structure of the risk, the oversight, the first, second, and the third line of defense in each of the organization. It does depend on the organization culture, most importantly. Second, the structure of the three lines of defense. How efficiently the first, second, and the third lines are structured. In most of the organizations these days, just to bring in efficiency, there are first and the second line, which are quasi second line and just merging into first. And then there is a third line. Okay. So it does depend on the structure, first of all, to answer your question. Most importantly, just as I keep telling my team always, is trust but verify. Even if the risk identification is done by the first line, do verify. So we do trust the work done by the first line of defense, but at the same time, you have to verify what you are trusting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it's always a good thing to align the risks. If audit has its own list of risks and risk management has a completely other hundreds of lines long list of risks, then it becomes quite confusing for the readers of the audit reports to kind of tie everything together and get the big picture.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. All right.
And so when auditors focus on risk uh, in such a way, what does that do for the perception of the business of audit? Are they perceived better, that they're adding more value, or how does that work?
Very interesting question, Tracy. Thanks for asking that, first of all, and it's very close to my heart. As any auditor who would have spent decades in internal audit, they have been perceived in different ways in different organizations. As I popularly call it, I would always say that how we as internal auditors are perceived totally depends upon what is the culture of the organization, how experienced are the employees and the leaders, and what is the approach the internal audit team is adopting to conduct their audit assignments. These three pillars usually define how we are perceived in the business. If I take an example, early on in my career, when I joined the industry from consulting, we were perceived as a watchdog. Why watchdog? Because at that point in time, the entire focus used to be on compliance of policies, regulations, procedures, standards. So, business used to perceive us as somebody who is coming to scrutinize as to whether we are following the policies or procedures or not. Cut to today, the view has changed 360-degree. Now, these days, we are either considered as a valued partner, trusted advisor, or change agent. Why valued partner? We come with a subject matter expertise. We bring in those fresh set of eyes which look at the same risk that the business is living with, but at the same time give it an assessment or a recommendation to mitigate them quite holistically, which is aligned with the strategic objectives of the business. Why change agent? Because these days, all auditors would be leveraging technology, latest innovations, and would be suggesting some continuous improvement and innovation opportunities. By that standard, business gets to have an improvement opportunity in their business, which are suggested by the internal audit. And so, in certain organization, we are perceived as change agents, which bring in new set of innovation opportunities or process improvement opportunities. Last but not the least, we are also viewed as trusted advisors these days. Why trusted advisors? Once you develop a strong relationship with the leadership, they understand the merit in internal audit, why internal audit is required, and what is the value that we bring on to the table. With consistent, transparent communications that we have with the business, they are able to bring it on to our notice in terms of where all they need our attention or where all they need an advice from an independent partner, which is internal audit. So I would say, to answer your question, long story short, the perception keeps changing in the way we conduct our audits, in how mature an organization is, or how mature the leadership function is.
I love that, how mature the leadership function is as well, because it sounds like there's a very good perception in your organization of internal audit and the contribution that internal audit can bring, which I think is brilliant. What I find in practice is that's not always the case, but it does depend on where the company is located. It depends on legal entity status, and it depends on how highly regulated they are to some degree,
Oh, yes.
which
Yes.
then impacts how leadership perceives audit and actually where audit can even roll up into the business.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
where you are is the goal. So it's a beautiful
Could
thing.
be. It is indeed. And yes, I thank the journey for bringing me to where I am. But having said that, it's never that easy because, as you rightly said, because for few organizations, it's not as glossy as it looks like today. There are organizations or departments which perceive internal audit as a necessary evil. You're just adding to the workload, you're not giving them any benefit, and that's how you're perceived. Having said that, to change that perception, this requires a lot of effort from internal audit also, because our approach and the way we communicate our findings makes a lot of difference. It should not always be a fault finding approach, is what I keep telling my team. There is always a way to bring across as to what you want to say. Focus on high risk areas, identify things which have been going on well, and focus on areas which can be correlated to the strategic objective of an organization. So you're right, it's a mix of both. There are few matured organizations where it is perceived as a trusted partner or a change agent or a valued advisor. However, there are few where it is still perceived as a necessary evil or a watchdog.
I think that's the case, and I know that at least the teams that I work with, where that is the case, where there is a gap between
Yeah.
those 3 of business partner, change agent, and trusted advisor. Where there is a gap, they're actively working towards that. Sometimes there are limitations because of leadership and company culture, but we are all, we're all working to change that perception. Um,
Absolutely.
I was with a client, I guess, about 6 weeks ago, and we had a very difficult conversation in the session, at the training session. It was one of my communication strategy workshops, and, it was probably the most difficult conversation I'd ever had in a workshop because of the I hesitate to use the word hostility towards auditors in some areas of the business, in some locations of the business, and, I ended up frustrated isn't the right word, but kind of at that moment where I thought, "Why can't they see that audit is opportunity?" And so for me, I think that's what I'm taking into, 2025 and beyond is audit is opportunity. And I hope that in everything we do and everything we say and everything we write on LinkedIn and how we present ourselves to the business and to the board and to right down to doing the field work is that we create that vision. It's for me, it's changing hearts and minds, right?
I hear you. Yes, absolutely. And you rightly highlighted, maybe hostile could not be an appropriate word, but yes, there is a pushback or reluctance to change or reluctance to accept in few organizations or few departments. And how do you deal with it when you are just trying to say that we are bringing in change, which can be a catalyst to the growth?
Right.
That's what we are here for. So you're right. That could be a little demotivating for the auditors as well. Having said that, it's difficult to deal with it, but it's a long drawn process, Tracy. It's a behavioral change that's
Yeah.
required.
Absolutely, from us and for them, right? So we inspire them and show them, and then they respond, hopefully accordingly. So there you go.
Yes.
I'd like to turn to your expertise in sanctions and embargoes because
Mm.
today's, geopolitical climate is quite volatile. And I'm wondering,
Yeah.
do you have a piece of advice you could share with our listeners who are auditors to help them navigate this environment and these kinds of compliance risks?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that question, Tracy. So I would just bring up, an instance which inspired me to pick up the learning in this field, first of all. Russia-Ukraine crisis, not too while back. was something which was quite a geopolitical climate that everybody was monitoring. There were resultant sanctions and embargoes which were levied on different countries, through the global institutions, etc. So, only one piece of advice which I followed and I think would help all my fellow auditors would be to stay informed and agile. This climate is changing so rapidly that unless you are informed, you are aware, and you are agile, you cannot deal with these risks. So, being educated about what's happening around us is most important. It's not just about getting those certifications, it's also important to be informed about what's happening around us. Check those regulations. What are the specificities? What are the kind of sanctions which have been put in place? Which transactions comes within the purview? Which transactions are sitting in the deviation bucket? You have to analyze each of those through continuous education. What also helps couple of internal audit teams in the organization in sanction space is a very robust compliance program. So what they usually do along with legal and compliance functions is to develop a very strong program on compliances, highlighting the importance of compliance while at the same time also highlighting how detrimental it would be to not comply with it. Then doing the trainings in the awareness sessions. I personally leverage technology a lot. Leveraging technology in these spaces also does help. So you can have some analytics that you can use, which can put off the red flags whenever these are corresponding transactions or corresponding countries, so that you can put this up as an auditable element in your audit cycle. So most often than not, as we discussed a while back, audits always have limited resources. So you have to evaluate your audit elements efficiently. Leveraging technology does come to the rescue in terms of screening through the transactions, picking up the red flags, deep diving on the red flags to focus as to where non-compliances can possibly be sitting.
I like that because I think the data is going to speak for you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I must say, I mean, there is no shortcut to evaluating that. Unless you deep dive, you engage with experts like legal, compliances, or the data officers of the organization. You learn about the latest trends, you leverage technology. It's very difficult to understand or bring non-compliances to your report unless you do the following. So in simple line, stay informed and agile whenever you are dealing with embargoes and sanctions.
I think staying agile and knowledgeable is great, especially for any emerging risk, not just for embargoes and sanctions. But I recently did an informal survey on LinkedIn of who is uh, describing or presenting emerging risks in their audit reports. I didn't get very much response, to be honest.
Oh,
So that's interesting for me because I know we're looking at not only providing insight, but foresight. Norman Marks corrects me all the time on LinkedIn when I talk about insight. He's like, Tracy, it's insight and foresight. And he's absolutely right.
right. Yeah.
And that's in the IAE literature now. The thing is, I still see challenges for internal audit in terms of, when they're writing an audit conclusion or presenting the audit results in an audit report, whether it's the half page, the full page, or the 30 page, ideally not. But there's challenges for internal audit to actually provide insight. Um,
Yes.
so providing the foresight, I think for some departments is still a step too far because I'm still trying to get them to give sufficient insight in their executive summary. What are your thoughts on emerging risks in audit reports?
So right, and I can't agree more with you on this. Mhm. Picking up the emerging risks in the audit reports is very, very critical. And you're right, and it doesn't feature in the standard audit report template. Let's be very clear. Okay. Most of the audit report templates that we have been using for decades that only focus on what was the auditable area, what was the conclusion, and a simple executive summary around that. Most of the templates do not address this. Okay. So that's where the design problem lies. However, it's the need of the hour. We have to give insight as well as foresight on the emerging risk. If I take an example in the scenario which is in India down here, GCCs in India, which is the Global Capability Centers in India, there are a lot of risks that are emerging because of the kind of work which is coming to the GCCs in India. So, unless we share the foresight and insight on how these risks would be impacting our organization first, how they are dependent on the activities which the audited function is doing, and how would it impact my overall risk appetite of the organization unless we capture these little pieces in our audit report. The readers of the report, majorly the audit committees and the risk committees of the organization, would not have this view, and they deserve to know this from an independent party like a third line of defense. Unless we share it, it doesn't come to light. So you're right. I mean, I agree on the benefit of sharing the emerging risks, the impact it has on the organization, the impact it has on the strategic initiatives of the organization, and where are we on mitigating those risks?
And I think it means we also need to make sure our teams are prepared to see emerging risks and then on how to report them, which does have to do with the template and the appetite in the business for that as well. So, given that, I want to switch into talking about your leadership style because you lead the internal audit team for NED's Global Innovation Center in India. And I'm wondering what your philosophy on leadership is when it comes to creating a high performance or maintaining a high performance internal audit team.
Great, thanks. Uh, so there's no one philosophy that fits all. First of all, it has to be tweaked every now and then. But there are few, I would say, fundamental pillars that I work back with. One is collaboration. Audit is not one man army. You need a team to do it. Okay. And that's where collaboration comes into play. For collaboration to work effectively, you have to delegate. You have to make your team, you have to empower them. You have to let them take the decisions. You have to trust them. For a head of the audit to have trust in the team, it's very important that we have a visibility on the continuous education or improvement that they are doing. So, investing in their continuous learning and development comes very handy. When I know that my team, if we go back to the earlier example of sanctions and embargoes team risk, when I know that my team is skilled, they know their job, I have to just empower them, let them take the decision, trust in their decisions, and let them take the call. And that's how I would be able to run a function which can give assurance to the board on the overall risk structures of the organization. So it's very important for having a high performing team, invest in their learning and development, make them or empower them to take the decisions. Tell them the efficacy of having a clarity in communication. Coach them to build relationships, strong relationships with different departments. Teach them to collaborate with different functions. Recognize a good work done by the team. It's very important. Unless you recognize it, I mean, it just goes down the path and people do not feel encouraged. So I would be one person who would recognize single most basic thing done by my team. Have clear communication with them. What do you expect from them? What is it that they are expected to deliver? How frequently would you reassess? Also, ensure that they have enough work life balance. We don't want a situation where they burn out and that does affect the quality of the audit results. So, there are a lot of such small factors, I would say, Tracy. But bottom line, collaboration, continuous improvement, and having trust in the team is most important.
I love that. And I'm glad you mentioned, investing in training for them because that way you lift everyone in the team up and I also like the what you said about expectations because letting you can't meet expectations if you don't know what they are. So letting them know what your expectations are and then empowering them to achieve that, I think is a very valuable thing. And so you've hit all the key words that are near and dear to my heart as well with collaboration and trust and empowerment and continuous improvement. I think these are super important. And then that communication. So on along the lines of that communication, a lot of internal auditors out there struggle influencing senior leaders and getting buy-in from skeptical audit clients. What's your approach to making sure that audit findings don't get ignored um, by leadership?
That's a tough one. And I guess we were talking about it a while back as well. Yeah. So I think over the years, what I have learned to deal with ensuring that the audit findings, one, are respected, they are addressed, and they get the right sort of attention that they deserve. It's very important to have a strong relationship with the leadership. Invest in that relationship because there is no shortcut to that. It's very important that you connect with leadership, try and engage with them and explain the value that internal audit brings to the table. Explain them the skill sets of your team and explain them the fact that the audits are always aligned with the strategic goals of the organization. It's not sitting in isolation. These are aligned with the overall strategic objective which the organization has. So we are also working towards a common goal. That trust, that relationship should be there for them to appreciate what you are bringing onto the table. Once they have a trust in your skill set, in your approach, in your goal, your findings are more receptive to them. They understand it quite clearly. They are partnering with you in that case to action the recommendations that you are giving to them. Also, I mean, going back to your question, that how can we increase the acceptability? One common thing that I have noticed over the years is communication, whether it is verbal or written, both is equally important for the audit to be successful. Our findings have to be concise, well explained with data. Our action plans should be measurable, deliverable. These should not be hypothetical, sitting absolutely, at a distance from what the function is doing. Have an empathy and try and understand where the business is coming from. Derive an action plan which is in conjunction with the projects that they are leading. Bring on the ideas onto the table and deliberate with them as to how efficiently we can deal with the risk. Come up with multiple solutions and pick up a solution which best suits the need while being in the spirit of the organizational culture also. Most importantly, we have to have a sight of the risk. We may be having lots and lots of findings, but not all findings are equally important. We have to adopt a risk based approach, just like we always keep saying that audits should adopt a risk based approach. So, pick up the risks which are very critical for the organization's attainment of its goal or for that function's attainment of its goal and could be detrimental to the mission or the vision of that department. Pick up those key risks, bring those key risks and the impact that your action plan would have if these risks are addressed. That's how you would receive reception on your findings, on your recommendations. That's how, I mean, I would personally deal with it. But yes, every finding, every oddity, every report is absolutely different. It could be a learning journey every time we sit across the table with an oddity. But these are a few learnings which I can share with you, along the course.
Thank you. And I think, some of those things are they resonate for me as well because when you said, every audit client, every audit, every finding is different. And one of the things I talk about quite a bit is knowing your stakeholder, knowing your audit client. And when you talked about, is it aligned with their goals? I think that's so important that every audit team before every audit is having those conversations with the leadership of the audit client saying, what are your goals? What are your pain points so that you can potentially align things, right? I always say if you can decrease their pain or increase their pleasure, they're a lot more likely to come along on this journey with you because you've understood and you can tie the issues and the recommendations to their pain pleasure points, and that's just very persuasive. And the other thing you said about risk, it's so important to be able to explain risk in your closing meeting or in your update meetings and in the audit report itself. And I think we miss the mark sometimes on that. So auditors need to understand the risk, from an operational perspective. Yes, they need to know that kind of higher level of financial or reputational and those kinds of things, but really understand what it means to the business because once as human beings, once we know or we get a better understanding of potential impact, we have an opportunity to make a different choice than we might have made otherwise. So we might not like the issue, but once we understand what it could mean to us, to our goals, to the organization, I think our goals is, number one, we're always, as human beings, again, thinking about how is this going to impact me and my team and my budget. Um, Once we understand that potential impact, we have an opportunity to actually get on board and say, yeah, okay. Instead of pushing back so easily, you know?
Absolutely. And these things, Tracy, they increase the likelihood. I would not say that they would be a sure shot success in senior leaders accept your finding. It would just increase the likelihood of the acceptance of the findings or the coming and seeing the risk the way that you are seeing. At the end of the day, there has to be a sense of accountability for the recommendation that you are giving to them. Unless they understand the merit in there, they would never have accountability fixed to the action. Otherwise, it would always remain an action plan driven by the audit. It would never be an action plan that the business wants to do.
Well, I'd like to switch topics just a little bit to a hot topic we have out there in the world right now, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know you're deeply involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Um, we'll focus for purposes of this discussion because it can be a much broader discussion on internal audit. So I'm wondering what's one change that could make the biggest difference for women in audit, just based on your knowledge and experience?
Yeah, so you rightly said DE&I is very close to my heart. I have been participating in these initiatives for quite some time now. Uh, what does make a difference is having those sponsorship and mentorship programs. You know, let's be very clear. Back in the past, it hasn't been a level playing field. Okay. So if we want to bring it down to a level playing field, there has to be some catch up gauge that is expected to happen. And I guess mentorship and sponsorship programs help in doing that catch up game beautifully. Taking an example of a mentorship program, a mentor could be a person who guides you, advises you on your career path by taking example from his own career. Okay. And he could, along the way, he or she could teach you, help you, guide you as to how efficiently you can take it further. On the contrary, a sponsor could be very vocal about his or her protege. He or she can advocate for any opportunities or key projects which are coming within the organization. He can volunteer or she can volunteer that my protege could be a good fit for these projects. So you want somebody who can speak up for you, who can, pull you through. These sponsorship and mentorship programs, to my mind, do that bit for the DE&I initiative, I would say. And these are very effective in the organizations that I have seen. And most importantly, you're learning from somebody's experience. So you see that somebody has made it big or has that, role which you want to achieve, or you want to achieve that particular path, or you want to achieve that particular scale. And you are resonating with the goals and the philosophies also, and the person can definitely guide you, empower you, and take you forward in your career trajectory.
I
If
love
that does
that.
answer
So
your question.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm gonna ask you a question that's really an assumption. So you've been mentored in the past and you're mentoring today?
Both.
Yes?
I have been mentored in the past, and I really thank my mentors for maybe bringing out the best from me. And they would guide you based on their experiences and their career journey. They may not be from your teams or from your function. Most of the time they are not. Okay, so they have an independent view. When you share your journey, when you share your end goal with them, they would guide you. Is it doable? How efficiently can you reach there? Along the way, they can set smaller milestones with you. Try and achieve this, try and do this. So let's say there is a key project coming up, which is not very closely aligned with what you're currently doing. You're not able to decide whether you should pick it up, whether you should leave it. It would require additional investment of time and all of that. You can discuss what are the merits of picking it up. Would it help my career? Shall I take that risk at this point in my career? Or shall I go, in a very literal way, step by step? So it is about exponential growth vis-a-vis about the standard growth that you are seeing. And I guess the mentors and sponsors really help you with those exponential growths.
I like that. And when I reflect on my own career, I would say I had one mentor, although she wasn't my official mentor. So, and I posted about this too. Her name is Cheryl Westad, and she's retired now. But I learned a lot from her just by working for her. And I, looking back, I do feel like a more formalized mentor mentee relationship could have been quite valuable. So I hope for everyone that's listening out there, if you would like one of those relationships, I would actually actively seek a mentor because it could make a huge difference in your career and in your life as well.
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. And once they are more organized mentor-mentee relationship, of course the value is far more. But nevertheless, don't shy away from asking for help from people whose career or whose goals or values resonate with yours.
So along that note then, I know you're also an advocate for young professionals, and I'm wondering, is there like a common mistake you see early career auditors make? And do you have any advice about how they can overcome that or avoid that entirely?
Yes, there are. See, first of all, everybody is learning from their mistakes. So I'm not sure how many mistakes can be avoided, first of all. But yes, I often see in my teams or in the people I see around, whom I am connected through different networks also, there are few common mistakes that people make in the journey as auditors. Being too transactional, okay, and rather than leaving the sight of the, what do you say, a big picture. So I'm not saying audit is all about having an eye for detail, having that professional skepticism, looking for those risks, highlighting those opportunities or threats in the organization. That's all given. But at the same time, what we have to learn as young auditors is not to lose the sight of a bigger picture. First of all, try and understand what the organization is doing. We are not paratroopers. We just don't come and start auditing. Okay, we have to first of all understand the organization. What is the organization doing? What is it striving for? What are the short term or long term goals that the organization has? Then evaluate the findings that you have along the course and link it back to whether it would make it easier or difficult for attainment of those goals and objectives. So, understanding of the organization is very fundamental that we should have before we start getting transactional about the audit findings. These days, it is very important, and I somehow feel that the young auditors who are not doing it are losing quite a bit. You should develop analytical skills. There is no shortcut to that. You have to understand as to what numbers are telling you. You have to try and understand the interpretation of the numbers. Nobody has the time and energy to go through thousands and thousands of pages and look at each and every number. You have to understand the bigger picture and what is it that those numbers are indicating you. Having those analytical skills is very, very critical. As an auditor, it's very critical. Also, what I observe in young auditors these days is, I mean, they shy away from asking the questions. Don't do that. Don't do that. You have all the right to ask the questions. Ask questions, clarifications from the more experienced staff that you have, from your auditees, from your stakeholders. Do ask. You That's entirely your choice whether you want to trust, but verify, do that. But at the end of the day, do ask the questions. That's very important. Communication lies at the core, and I keep saying this 1,000 times to my team in every conversation. You have to communicate effectively, whether you write, whether you speak, it's both verbal and written. Communicate in a clear, succinct manner what you want to say. What is it that has gone wrong? Why it has gone wrong? And how would it impact? Communication lies at the key. So, I mean, these days, the young auditors who are coming up, they are coming up with a lot of energy, a lot of skills. But yes, these are a couple of things. If these can be taken care of, you would have a great career ahead.
I love that advice. I mean, it's keep the energy, keep the curiosity, ask the question, ask the questions, no matter if you think it's, the traditional, it's a stupid question. I'm not going to ask it, or I might look bad if I ask the question, and asking the tough questions. Know how to use data analytics and how to interpret data analytics and how to, I think, explain the interpretation of the data to your audit client, and then get the big picture. I think you mentioned that first, and I think that's really a significant one, is be able to see the big picture, and that takes some investment in terms of learning about the business and some time to reflect on what you've seen and compare that. So that's, I think, super advice for early auditors. So if you're out there, early auditors, as part of our listeners, I hope you have taken some notes on that, because that's great advice. So thank you for that. And what I want to do now is kind of turn a little more personal, because I know you're a runner and you're into fitness. And I'm wondering, what you take from that. What is it about those two things that help you be successful as an auditor?
Well, you're right. I am a fitness enthusiast and I run. And most of the time, if you talk to a runner after a heavy day at work, the moment you get back and you feel, oh my God, I'm too tired, let me go out and run. So people who don't do that would find it very difficult to believe you're already tired and you still want to run. But it clears your mind. Let me make it very clear. It does clear your mind. So there are a lot of things that I find during my marathon training sessions, or during my uh, running plans that I make for myself, that actually I can relate to my professional work also. So there are some commons in both, I would say. First of all, time management. It teaches you time management, okay? When you have a career, you have family, you have everything, and then you have to make time for your marathon also. You're trying in figuring out how efficiently can you do that. That's the same thing with your audit. Okay. So you have to ensure your deadlines are met while at the same time doing all of those ancillary stuff which are required as the head of the department. You do have to ensure that your timelines are met with the same quality outcome that is expected out of you. So time management is something that, my running teaches me how efficiently can I do that. Then the other key aspect that I can resonate with running and my audit work is adaptability and resilience. Most of the time, when you go out for a run, it's unpredictable. The weather can go wrong. You can have an injury. Sometimes you might strike a bad road and whatever. There are lots of certain things. That's the same thing which happens in audit. I mean, regardless of how efficiently you plan it, there are still so many things which can go wrong. So, adaptability and being resilient to your end goal is so important, which I think running teaches me, I mean, to remain adaptable whenever there are such situations and being resilient towards what you want to achieve eventually. Attention to detail is also something. So, most of the time when we run, our pace, our posture, our nutrition, all of that is important. With a heavy stomach, you can't run. So you have to keep all of these things, the fine things into mind when you are preparing for a long run. At the same time, these attention to details are important when you audit. You have to figure out these stakeholder connects, the periodic update calls, the follow ups, the engagement with the board or the audit committee. All of this is important while you're planning your audit, also. Goal setting. You set your target, whether it is 10 kilometer, 21, 42 kilometer. What is it that you want to achieve? How do you want to train yourself for that? So all of that can easily be translated to your audit work. And it does help me, Tracy, a lot of times when I am low on energy, I find the synergies which the audit and the running brings out. So yes, it does help me quite a bit.
Interesting. It's interesting because I'm reflecting, because I had moved and I got my treadmill out, because it's snowy in Canada, and when it's snow and cold and ice, I don't want to be walking, for my fitness. Um, but there are days when I've had a super long day, like maybe work till 7 p.m. and I usually start at 7 a.m. because I work a lot with Europe. And then I got on the treadmill at like 8 o'clock, and it actually felt really good. And
Yeah.
when I reflect back, hearing you, and because I think I don't do it that often, that late, but actually maybe I should be because it's a great way to kind of decompress from the day. But I'm wondering, when you're running, what do you think about? Are you thinking about breath and pace and posture? Or are you thinking about other things?
Well, both. So, yes, good question. When I'm running, most of the time, the initial few miles would always be just clearing your mind after a tough day. Okay. You just want to listen to the music that you're playing and you just don't want to think about anything else. Once your mind is cleared, once you are in a comfortable space, then you start taking note of your posture. Oh my God, I'm bending too much, or I'm slow, or I'm too fast. All of that. So I think it's a gradual process, just like we have milestones in our auditing procedures. We start with clearing of some basic things, then we move on to the high risk areas, then we move on to those strategic initiatives that should be married with the risk, etc. So it's exactly like that, I would say.
I love that. All right. Let me ask you, in your journey as an internal audit, is there one unexpected lesson maybe you could share with us?
Well, indeed, yes. So, as I said, about 25 years into audit now, what I've learned now, and it's very unexpected, that effective communication and relationship building lies at the core. If you ask me today, my advice to all young auditors is steal the deal on your communication. Steal the deal on your communication and your relationship building. However, if you would have asked this question to me about 15 years back, I would have said that having that skill set, having those eye for details, being too transactional, or understanding your audit procedures, etc., was critical. Well, all of that still is critical. But something which is far more critical is your effective communication skills and building a strong and trustworthy relationship with the manager. It's very important. And I can't stress more on that. So, assuming a scenario where you have built a trust with the leadership, it's very easy for them to be open and receptive to the ideas that you bring onto the table. Otherwise, most often than not, how it so happens is a function has been doing their activity for ages and come an internal auditor and they start highlighting design gaps in the process. That's not well received. But you don't know, we have been doing it well enough for the last 10 years and it's working fine. Why do we need to change it? Why do we need to change it? Brings in the art of your effective communication. You have to explain it to them effectively as to what is it that you're trying to say. So communication, building trust with the stakeholders, having a strong relationship with them is very important. And as I also highlighted earlier, having an empathy and understanding of what's their journey like. What is it that they are trying to achieve? There could be certain situations where there is a big ticket project that a department is doing. During the course of project, there are smaller milestones. And as part of those milestones, there are specific activities happening. So try and spend some time and understand the perspective that they are coming from. Maybe the action we are suggesting is not appropriate at this point in time. It could be far more efficient once the project is over. So, having that empathy, active listening skills, and understanding of what business is trying to put up on the table is also equally important.
I love that. And I mean, obviously communication is near and dear to my heart when it comes to the internal audit profession and building relationships as well. And I do see in some clients that I work with that it is easier for some auditors to communicate with higher levels in the organization than it is with some other clients where there's more of a hierarchy, a defined hierarchy in the organization. And so the head of audit communicates at this level, and a director of audit communicates at this level, and a manager communicates at this level. So there's some of that going on. And I think as much as one can do to kind of break break those limitations, I think is important for all of us because the more experience we get communicating with people at levels beyond the level that we're at, the better we learn and the better we learn to communicate.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have to master this art of effective communication. I strongly feel that in chartered accountancy or CPAs, there has to be a specific focus on communication because that's where the audit derives its success. It is not what you say, it is how you say it.
And that's what drives me every single day because I know when I was an auditor, we didn't have training on how to influence, how to discuss or have that back and forth discussion of findings and recommendations or how to write an audit report or how to run a closing meeting or how to even design a presentation. We didn't have any of that. So that really excites me that there's so much more available today to our profession, and I'm very happy to be part of that.
Sounds good.
Last question: what legacy do you hope to leave behind in the world of internal audit once you decide to retire or do something different?
Yeah. So in terms of legacy, I always believe, I mean, as during the course of our conversation, also we talked about it, the value of internal audit. We should not be perceived as a compliance function, first of all. We are the partners in the bringing to light the strategic initiatives that the organization is working towards. So work as a trusted advisor or a partner. Don't work as a compliance expert or a watchdog or a necessary evil that's there in that some people perceive it to be. There has to be a culture of integrity, you know, regardless of what you are bringing onto the table. It's very important that you hold the highest ethical standards in terms of leading by example. As auditors, we are always looked upon as somebody who is setting an example even if it is compliance to policies or standards or regulations. If we don't do it, we can't even talk about people should be doing it. So, lead by example is very important. Bring on that value for the audit as a trusted partner or a valued advisor and mentor and develop the young auditors. Invest in them, coach them, sponsor them, be a mentor to them, and help them learn and develop themselves. So these are a couple of things that I strongly believe in. I mean, if whenever I decide to move on and pick up another area instead of internal audit, these would be three key pillars that I would strongly believe should be taken up as far as the internal audit is concerned.
Super. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being with me today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I think there's so much good advice that auditors kind of maybe in the first half of their career could pick up, and certainly as audit leadership can benefit as well. So thank you for so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tracy, for your time. It was a pleasure talking to a like minded individual who strongly believes in the value of the audit. And I really look forward to our conversations. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast. We'd love for you to stay part of our growing community, so subscribe wherever you're listening. If you're enjoying our content on platforms like iTunes or Spotify, a quick 5-star rating from you would mean the world to us. It's a small action that supports our mission immensely. Don't forget to explore the show notes for various links and join our vibrant community on all our social media platforms. Your interaction and support play a crucial role in amplifying the voices of inspiring women in audit and spreading their inspiring stories even further. Thank you for being a part of our journey, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast.